Happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday.
Happy St. Augustine Saturday.
Little alliteration there.
Yeah, I love me some alliteration.
It is very satisfying, and the S's are great. Thank God we had speech classes when we were younger. Or I would be in trouble.
And we would not be doing a podcast.
No. But we are doing a podcast. This podcast, which is Haunted or Hoax, and I am Kristen.
And I am Jennifer.
And we are doing episode 6, and this is our first ghost tour on the fly episode.
Another S for my 6th Saturday, St. Augustine. That didn't work. Never mind.
It's fine. We'll figure it out in the title.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're here in St. Augustine. We're here together. I had a little bit of a shorter commute because I live in Florida. Jennifer drove down from Georgia, and we took a ghost tour with the Spyglass Haunted History Tour run by Kevin Rose, who is also the co-founder of the Paranormal Association St. Augustine, which is also an acronym PASTA. We
also love acronyms on this podcast.
And we love pasta. So this was a great experience.
And honestly, it was a super good tour. He did a really good job at telling you the legend and then being like, well, this is what this tour group will tell you, but here's what's really going on. So it lined up really well with our podcast.
Yeah, and it was something that I really wasn't expecting. In the description, he does say it's a accurate history haunting tour, which was what caught my eye. But he really went into it, and it was great information.
Yeah, it really was. He did a good job, and at the end, we were able to get kind of an insider scoop on a location that he had firsthand experience with, and we were also able to do some very, very low-key paranormal investigation.
Mild investigation, salsa mild.
Yes, enchilada sauce.
So yeah, it was really great. Throughout the night, we heard a bunch of stories, but what we kept running into and what we're deciding to talk about today are the ghost children of St. Augustine.
Which is a little sad.
Very, very sad, but very interesting. There are a lot of ghosts in St. Augustine. Like Kevin kind of mentioned to us, you could pretty much go to every other house and knock on the door and somebody would have a ghost story about their house, a haunting in their home. But there were 3 stories that were centered around children, had a lot of tragic rumors surrounding them. So we'll go through those today. And then Jennifer will kind of expand on some of the historical context of them.
Yeah. You ready?
I'm
just
ready.
Gonna jump on into it?
Definitely. So the first one, first of all, let me go ahead and go through all my sources. I got most of my information for all 3 stories from our Spyglass Haunted History Tour. I also went through St. Augustine Ghost Tours, a Tales of the Ancient City from staugustine.com. I also used Citygates of staugustine.com, Florida Historic Coast, and then I also used the St. Augustine Lighthouse.org and ghostandgravestones.com.
Perfect.
So the first story that I'm going to get into is the story of little James Morgan at the Tomalado Cemetery. Is that how you say it?
I think so.
You guys can correct me. I don't care.
Tollamato?
Tollamato?
Tollamato.
It reminds me so much of tomato. So Tollamato.
Tollamato.
You know, to each his own. I mean, I'm going to try my best. So
I did spell that right, though. Tollamato.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
Tollamato.
It is a Catholic cemetery, and it has a story of James Morgan, and I'm going to get into that. We hit this stop first because apparently it is a very popular one.
Mm-hmm.
So let me go ahead and get into the story of James. So James was a 5-year-old boy that is supposedly buried alone and haunts the cemetery. The most popular legend, Kevin told us, like I said, and what I've seen on multiple sites, the story goes, James Morgan loved to climb a 350-year-old Y-shaped oak tree that currently shades his grave. In November of 1877, he supposedly climbed too high and fell, breaking his neck and killing him, which is so upsetting. That's why you don't climb trees. I climbed maybe 2 trees when I was a child. So he fell from the tree, breaking his neck and killing him. The information that I got from Ghost Tales of an Ancient City article, Morgan's mother actually purchased several plots around the gravestone, supposedly, I assume, to be buried near their son. However, rumor has it she and Morgan's father became so distraught that they couldn't even stand to be in St. Augustine anymore, and they left the city, never returning. Which, I mean, if you're so distraught over your son's death, and then you just leave him there, wouldn't you dig him up and then take him with you, maybe? I'm not sure. There was also a ghostly encounter story that said that James had 2 siblings, but Kevin on our tour never mentioned that, and I did not find that very many other places. Supposedly he had a sister named Agnes and a brother named Arthur.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see that anywhere else except ghostly encounters, so that might just be a rumor that they have developed. There was a person interviewed in the Ancient City article who said that they were a horse and carriage driver for 15 years. And on a particular night, they were driving a large carriage that was holding about 20 people. And they stopped at the cemetery. He glanced up at the tree and saw what appeared to be a young boy. Moore is the driver. He said all of the passengers saw this little boy in the tree, but he didn't say a word. Like, the boy was just kind of hanging out there. I guess they just were like, hey, and then took off. I don't know.
So what makes me stop at that story is if you see the oak tree, first off, how did a child get up that tree? Because it is not a climbing tree. Like,
No.
this tree is 200 years old. It
Right.
is huge, but it's not a climbing tree. It's like Savannah style oak tree, no lower limbs.
Right. It's
And
huge.
it is huge. So if I saw a young boy hanging out in that tree, first off, I'd be like,
What are you doing?
You are a squirrel. How did you get up there?
Right.
Second off, do you need help getting down?
Right. Do we need to call the fire department?
Yeah.
But they said that, like, they recognized it as a ghostly figure.
I see.
But again, you guys just saw that, and there was no pictures to accompany this. Even if you saw a ghostly figure and you thought, oh, that's a spirit of James, nobody took pictures. There was no pictures to accompany this account. And I feel I would be able to find them somewhere online if there was a apparition, like a full body apparition of a boy hanging in a tree.
And you said there were like 20 people?
Yeah, 20 people. And it was a ghost tour. So
Yeah.
I feel like there should be documentation of that.
Mm-hmm.
Some other experiences I found on StAugustineGhostTours.net was from Raphael, who said that he lived in St. Augustine before for a couple years. They went on a kind of investigation alone around 9 p.m. and they were doing an EVP digital recording session. During the recording session, they heard a little boy's voice say hello twice. And then when they asked the spirit its name, the EVP replied James. They wanted to preface this and really drive home that they were alone and there was no children around them when they got this EVP. They did not provide the EVP in this account. And we all know how I feel about saying experience, especially with an EVP or a picture, and then not providing that evidence. It grinds my gears. So the next account was Valerie. She claimed that James hugged her often as she approached the cemetery gates after a walking tour. I believe that Valerie was a tour guide.
Oh, I see.
And said that after her walking towards, she would go back towards the cemetery and James would then hug her with dowsing rods, like she was using dowsing rods.
Oh, I see.
Which reminded me, Kevin did state in another case he was talking about that a spirit would regularly hug people with the dowsing rods. So that kind of is like a common theme with dowsing. I've never used dowsing rods.
How did they figure it out that it was a hug, though? Like,
Yeah.
how was that determined?
I'm assuming they think that it's James. So a 5-year-old boy is most likely hugging you and not, trying to pull you you into the other side. I would kind of be freaked out if that happened to me.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I would find it comforting.
But a little 5-year-old, it's a very sad story, especially like I found what I think is pretty close to the truth, and it's a sad story regardless of how you swing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, all of our stories
That's
are kind
true.
of sad today. But yeah, I don't know if even if it was a 5-year-old boy wanting comfort, I don't know if I want to be hugged by a ghost.
No 5-year-old hugs for you?
I don't know. I think I'd be very freaked out and then also very sad. It would bum me out. I don't know. And apparently James will talk to other little children and like show themselves. Kevin did say on the tour that it's mostly he kind of goes up and down the fence, the gate,
Yeah.
and then little children often see him and see him walking and kind of point it out. That's kind of the experience of Gaga, who left a review, who said, "We went on the ghost tour tonight. My granddaughter, who is 5, said she saw a little boy and he told her he missed playing with his sister," which is so sad. But also, Gaga, maybe use your real name and not your grandparent name. I'm assuming Gaga is what her grandchild calls.
Maybe she's a lady.
Oh, maybe. I don't know.
Lady Gaga.
Lady Gaga. Oh.
Oh, that went right over your head.
That went right over my head. But maybe it is Lady Gaga. We just don't know.
She's trying to keep her in anonymity.
But then she doesn't have a grandchild that we know of.
That we know of.
So yeah, that made me really sad to read that supposedly James told this little girl that he missed his sister playing with her.
That is sad.
If he had a sister.
Do you want me to get into that?
Yes. Let's go ahead and get into the history of it. I didn't really get anything else. There's supposedly some EVPs of the cemetery on panicked.com, but I wasn't able to listen to them. They wouldn't open for me. They were old files from like 2016, so they might have been deleted off the site and then the button's still there. Kevin did mention that he and his team have not done much investigating in the cemetery because it's fenced off, and given it's a Catholic cemetery, they don't really want people to go in and investigate it. So
Yeah.
as far as like paranormal experiences go, that's where I kind of hit a dead end with this story.
Didn't you find something about somebody saying that they saw like a floating orb?
Yes, I found like one video on Instagram of a haunted ghost tour that said that they saw a floating orb and they were recording it. But if you look at that video, it's very clearly a laser pointer. And I only say this because last night on our ghost tour, we saw other ghost tours who were using laser pointers, and it's very clearly that's what it was in the fog. It was not an orb. I've looked at plenty of pictures of orbs. I know what they look like, and this video that they're claiming was an orb of little James going around his tombstone on the cemetery was not it.
Right. So, first off, the headstone, like, sitting by itself is just very sad. But when you look at the history of it, it makes sense why it is how it is.
Okay.
So, James was buried in Tulamato Cemetery in 1877, and his headstone reads, died at age 5 years, 10 days or something along those lines. And it's heartbreaking.
It is very, very sad. 5 years, 10 days, such a short little life.
So to give you some background, and my sources were findagrave.com, one of my favorite sites, and just the TulamatoCemetery.com, the cemetery website. Very simple sources today.
Yeah.
His mother, Amanda, was born in Middleburg, Florida, and it doesn't seem like there's much information on his father, Edward, but they, are also listed on Find a Grave. And James was actually the second born out of 8 of the Morgan's children.
Oh, so there's more than just Agnes and Arthur.
Your jaw just hit the ground.
I know. I thought for sure that these siblings were not real. They were just made up for a tour.
No, the Morgans had 8 children.
Oh my gosh.
So after doing some research, like I said, everything kind of ended up making a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
James died in 1877, which was at the very tail end of a cholera epidemic that was happening around the world. It wasn't just in the Americas.
Okay.
Cholera made its way to America around 1870, and it technically, like the epidemic, lasted through 1875, so it wouldn't be too far-fetched that he was still able to contract it in 1877.
Right.
So it would be reasonable to assume that that's how he died. I don't have any proof of that. That's just looking at, we know the South had a lot of really bad epidemics. This was still way too early for the Spanish flu. Yellow fever didn't happen until later on. So really the only thing that was going on at that time was cholera. But it could have been an accident. He did not fall from the tree and hit the ground and they bury him where
Right
he
there.
lied.
Yeah.
Kevin mentioned that he has a picture of the cemetery pretty early on and the tree wasn't even there.
Yeah.
So that just kind of debunked that altogether. The Talamata Cemetery was active until 1884, which closed. And then the Huguenot Cemetery was created and used because of the yellow fever outbreak that was happening at the time. If you weren't Catholic, then you were buried there. If you were Catholic, then you were buried in the Mission of Nombre de Dios Cemetery. Very English pronunciation. Sorry about that.
That was good, I think.
Yeah. So James also had two other siblings that are buried in St. Augustine, Arthur and Agnes. So that is correct.
Oh.
Arthur was age 6 when he died and Agnes was 2. And they both passed in 1886, only 8 days apart from each other.
Oh, that is so sad.
Yeah.
That's such a bummer.
It's heartbreaking. They are buried in the Mission of Nombre de Dios Cemetery, and afterwards, their other family members are mainly buried in El Paso, Texas.
Oh,
So I would assume that their story goes something like this. The Morgans originally lived in St. Augustine. Their son contracted cholera. Their son James contracted cholera and passed. He was buried in the active Catholic cemetery at that time, Talamata Cemetery. Then Arthur and Agnes contracted the yellow fever in 1886, since the main outbreak happened from 1887 to 1888 in the city. So it kind of makes sense.
Right.
And they were buried in the current active Catholic church at that time. Then the Morgans took their remaining 5 children and moved out west to Texas.
Probably because they didn't want any more fevers taking their children.
Correct. And unfortunately, they would end up losing 3 more children after the move.
Oh my gosh.
And only 2 of the 8 would make it to adulthood.
Oh, this poor family.
Yeah.
Ugh.
So that's kind of where I landed on James's story. If his mother did purchase plots next to him, then his siblings would have been buried there as well.
Yeah, and it kind of sounds like he was like the tail end of burials to happen in that cemetery. So
Right.
It could be that she might have purchased plots, but then they closed the cemetery before using them. I don't know.
I think if you purchase the plots, then you're still allowed to be buried in there.
No. I don't
Even
know how
after
plots work.
Yeah.
I haven't looked into my own mortality.
It's like reserving
so-
your table.
Oh, okay. Reserving your table for death.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a nice way to put it, I guess. But, I mean, yeah. It kind of sounds like they lost 3 children due to illness in St. Augustine and then had to move on.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it didn't end well. Didn't stop there, so.
No, they ended up losing Clement in Texas at age 7, and then Maud in
Gosh, these
Texas.
little names.
I know. At age 8, and then William in Texas at age 22.
Oh, so William actually like got into a little bit of adulthood before he passed.
Yeah, he's still very, very young, though.
Yeah.
Joseph made it to age 70, and then Honora made it to age 88, but they are all buried in Texas.
So it would make sense for little James to kind of feel isolated and alone, especially if 2 of his siblings are buried kind of close by in St. Augustine.
Mm-hmm.
It does make sense, like that little girl experience of, I miss playing with my little sister.
Mm-hmm.
Could be Agnes. Although, if she was 2 when she passed and James was 5, and she was born in probably like 1886?
Agnes was born in 1884.
1884. And so James wouldn't have ever met her, right?
Right.
So he must be talking about maybe Honora.
Yeah, Honora was born in 1874.
So in theory, he would have been talking about that sister, but still, maybe he can sense that he has like still family in St. Augustine, but he can't get to them because he's at a different cemetery, which is sad.
It is sad. I mean, like I said, it doesn't matter how you swing it. It's a sad story.
Yeah.
But just to be clear,
he wasn't falling from a tree.
And he wasn't just left behind in the middle of the road.
Yeah. That was the other thing. It was like kind of like he was just abandoned, but not really. I'm sure it's even now it's expensive to dig up a body and then move it. Yeah. Like, I think that then it was probably just no way.
I think, and at that point, the family probably just had enough.
Yeah.
Because losing 2 of your babies, like, they were their babies.
Right.
They were very young. At age 6 and 2, 8 days up, like, that's not a little over a week from each other.
Yeah. Which would make sense terrible. With yellow fever too, because I think Kevin did mention it's like takes like 2 weeks, so they probably both contracted it, and then it's so sad.
It is sad. So that's the story of little James P. Morgan.
Yeah, it's a little sad story.
It's a little sad story.
The next one we are going to go into was I think our third stop on the ghost tour, and it was the St. Augustine city gates and the story of the gatekeeper's daughter. So the St. Augustine city gates were what kind of kept the city safe. It had at one time big oak doors and a drawbridge, Kevin said. And there was supposedly, the story goes, a gatekeeper who was supposed to greet people, let people in and out, and then close up the gate and the drawbridge at the end of the night at dusk. And the little girl's spirit who welcomes people at the city gates is supposed to be the daughter of the St. Augustine gatekeeper. She would regularly join her father in opening the city gates at dawn and then closing them at dusk. She supposedly became a town icon, and then in one article, she supposedly died of typhoid fever at age 9. However, I found another story on oldcityghosttours.com that says she died of yellow fever in 1821, which would match up with what Kevin was saying, that yellow fever had that huge outbreak. But then I think that was later on.
Yeah, the main one that I saw in St. Augustine was 1887 and 1888.
Yeah.
But they could have had more than one. I mean, Savannah, I think, had 3 bursts of yellow fever.
That's true. There's also some discrepancy with her ages throughout the stories. I found some stories that said she was young as 7 to 9, and then some of them I found put her at 12 to 14. Like, I found one story that says a teenage Elizabeth died of yellow fever, and unable to afford a burial site in town, her father took her to Anastasia Island and buried her there. But Elizabeth is the name of the gatekeeper's daughter that kept popping up, and she is determined to return home. So she stands outside the city gates at 3 a.m. and warns visitors of yellow fever. That was one story. The main story that Kevin said, he claims that her name was not Elizabeth, but everywhere else says her name was Elizabeth. But the story goes that she developed yellow fever, and in the delirium of yellow fever, she wandered away from the gates while her father was working and greeting people. Her father just assumed that she went home, I guess. 7 to 9-year-olds just wander off and go home sometimes by themselves without saying anything.
And then you get home and realize she's not there and don't do anything about it.
Well, I think that the story Kevin told us was like he got home at dusk after locking up. And he saw that she wasn't there. So him and townspeople searched the city of St. Augustine and couldn't find her. My thing is, the last place you saw her was at the gates. Maybe go back to the gates. I think the story goes that they searched the whole city, but they didn't go back to the gates. If my child was missing, I would stand at the gates all night, just in case she came back.
Mm-hmm.
But Elizabeth, quote unquote, her name, her father did not do that. I guess they searched for a while, and he was like, I'll continue the search in the morning. I gotta go open the gates at dawn. I still have my job to do. And Elizabeth came back in the night and found them locked and couldn't re-enter the city. She succumbed to yellow fever that night at the city gates, and then her father came back at dawn to open them and found her body. That is the legend, and here are some of the experiences. Again, I found a picture that is supposedly Elizabeth's outline on the city gates. It's not very compelling. I had to zoom way in to see what they were talking about. I also saw an orb from our haunted ghost travels. I will link the blog. It's a very charming couple that runs it. And they took some pictures and they found some orbs. And again, they're kind of faint. They're not very compelling as far as evidence. But some of the experiences, the Black Parrot Candy Shop that is directly across from the city gates, the owner, Sue Ramsden, says that she has experienced several things with Elizabeth. Consistently, she hears a child's voice or a door open and close and turns around. There's nobody there. She also said a group of toy bunnies and lollipops were rearranged overnight, along with the previous owner of the shop claimed bags would fly off the shelves and whiz towards her. Supposedly, Elizabeth will wander off to some of the shops from the city gate, but she always returns to the city gates, if that makes sense. Kevin also told us a story of a ghost tour goer who put her arm out and invited the little girl to take a picture with them. And then when she took the picture, the little girl had joined, and they had a large orb in the photo. He did not have that picture with him. They might have not shared it. They might have not emailed it to him. Not everybody who gets orbs and stuff kind of think to go back to the ghost tour and say, hey, I found this.
Yeah.
Sometimes they just keep it to themselves. They might be freaked out. Elizabeth didn't show up in any of my pictures of the city gates. We took a group photo, which we will put on our Instagram because it's a great photo. But it does not have the little girl in it. Did you get anything from your...
No,
no pictures? And maybe she wasn't there. Maybe she was... It's been a very crowded weekend at St. Augustine.
Yeah, it was very busy.
Yeah, so we didn't realize that the first weekend of December is when they put all their Christmas lights out, so there was a lot of people, so maybe she was overwhelmed.
I was overwhelmed.
I was also overwhelmed. There was a lot of trolleys going by of a lot of people screaming Merry Christmas at us.
So much Christmas spirit being screamed at us.
And we're just over here trying to have our ghost tour, and it was a lot.
It was a lot. So I wouldn't be surprised if she decided just to go over to Anastasia Island and hang out for a little bit.
Right. If she was actually buried there. Did you find anything on a supposed Elizabeth at the city gates?
So, no, I didn't. This is one of those that reminded me of Abercorn a little bit, where it's very vague details. Nobody really knows any solid details. So it kind of made me a little skeptical of the story. And then I found on ghostcitytours.com, they actually talked about the history of the gate itself. And they mentioned that in the 19th century, so in the 1800s, there was no gatekeeper. They only had sentries posted at the gates.
Oh, so there was just like soldiers or something.
Just soldiers.
That makes sense. It's kind of like Buckingham Palace.
Yeah, except without the funny hats.
Yeah.
So there would be no gatekeeper to have a daughter.
That's true. Well, maybe one of the soldiers' daughters.
Maybe. So there is some speculation, and this story is also by Ghost City Tours, that, like you said, the ghost belongs to a younger girl, not a 8-year-old, but more
like
14.
a teenager. Yeah.
And it belongs to the unidentified body of a girl who did die at the gates of yellow fever. At the time, they buried all of their unidentified, unclaimed individuals in the Huguenot Cemetery, which is not too far away from
the city
gates. Unfortunately, the Huguenot Cemetery, I guess, follows suit with every other old cemetery where some people don't deserve to be remembered.
Right. We just get like
a marker
that has like a little scribble on it, and then we're done.
So I have an excerpt from a 1918 book, St. Augustine Under Three Flags Tourist Guide in History, published by the W.J. Harris Company.
You find the most awesome books.
I don't know about this. The burial ground adjacent to the city gates was originally a potter's field where excommunicants and criminals were buried.
Oh my God.
The land was later purchased by the Presbyterian Church and used for a Protestant cemetery. The oldest graves bear no inscription because it was thought better to obliterate, not retain, the memories of individuals who died outside the church or the law.
Oh my goodness. St. Augustine.
I mean, that tracks with like a lot of the cemeteries that we are.
I know, but still.
Yeah.
Everybody deserves to have their memory somewhere.
Just like proof of existence. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
You
don't have to say anything nice about them. You don't have to say like, here lies this murderer.
Yeah.
Or just put their name or something on it. I don't know.
And the date, like their time on Earth. It's giving me fuel for our movement that we're going to have. We're going to start a charity or something, an organization that puts markers on graves.
Find and name foundation.
Mm-hmm.
We'll research and rename all of the headstones that don't have them. That is copyrighted.
Clip that out.
Don't steal our idea or fund it for us and give us credit and
let us help.
So you're saying this unidentified girl who did die at the city gates.
Allegedly.
So
I don't think there's going to be a lot of information about people dying of yellow fever because everybody was dying of yellow fever in the 1800s. Like it was a really bad epidemic, not just in Florida, but like everywhere on the southeast.
Right.
Mosquitoes are terrible.
Right.
Nobody likes them here.
I get bit by a mosquito like every other week.
And aren't you glad?
It's December.
Yeah.
I have a bug bite right now.
Yeah, I'm still killing mosquitoes inside of my house. How did they get there? Where did they come from?
Wait, I don't know.
We're not talking about that.
We're not going to talk about that.
No. But anyway, I couldn't find a lot of information about this one. So I'm going to say, I mean, more than likely it's something because St. Augustine is much like Savannah where there are bodies everywhere.
But it's not the gatekeeper's daughter.
It is not the gatekeeper's daughter because there was no gatekeeper.
Well, yeah. And I'm kind of like inclined to believe that it's not obviously the gatekeeper's daughter, but there is something because Kevin was really credible for me. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I feel like if he saw a photo, he showed us a lot of photos. The photos that he did show us. So I think that he's not making up somebody had a photo with a large orb in it. So there could be something there. And I did see orbs in some other photos, but
yeah. And he was also himself speculative of even the name Elizabeth.
Yes. Yeah. He did mention there are 3 Elizabeths buried in that cemetery that is close by.
Mm-hmm.
But he himself did not believe that the little girl's name was Elizabeth. And so I'm more inclined to believe it might be a teenager that died of yellow fever.
And having candy thrown off the shelves towards you sounds more like a teenager than a small child.
Yeah, because a small child would just stuff it right into their ghostly cheeks and run away. That's what I would do if I was
Your
a
ghostly
child.
Cheeks?
My ghostly cheeks. if I was a little girl ghost, that's what I would do. I would just take all the candy. I would not throw it at you.
That's good to know. I'll keep an eye out for that.
Perfect.
So the last one that it wasn't the last stop, but it was the 4th stop.
Yeah, it was the 4th stop, 4.5 stops, because we actually went to the fort, and then he ended up telling us the story of the St. Augustine Lighthouse, which we could see the light, but we didn't actually go there.
Right. The lighthouse is right across the river, and it holds the story of the Pity girls.
Yes.
So tell us about this disaster.
I will. So it started with Hezekiah Pity, which is just one hell of a name.
Like, could you get any better than an 1800s name? Hezekiah.
Yeah, no. He did show us a picture of Hezekiah, and he looks like a Hezekiah.
He does, but now that I know the story, when you look at Hezekiah, he looks sad.
He does look a little sad. So Hezekiah moved from Maine. This is what the story goes. He moved from Maine to St. Augustine to build a new lighthouse in 1871. He moved there with his wife and their children, Mary, Eliza, Edward, and Carrie, which in the story that Kevin told us, he didn't mention a son.
Mm-mm.
It was just the 3 girls.
No, he just had the picture of the 3 girls.
Yeah. So this is the only, the lighthouse website is the only one that I saw with a son in the mix. There could have been a son. I don't know. The pity children were often seen at the construction site as children playing around. Like it was used as like a playground almost to keep the children occupied.
I saw the rudest excerpt where somebody said that they would be classified as ADHD and leaving them around a construction site was like a setup for disaster. I was like, could you be any more disrespectful? And where are you getting this information from that the children were hyperactive?
Yeah. How are you diagnosing these children from beyond the grave?
Right.
Like,
I was very offended by it. Anyway, carry on. I just needed to make that note. Don't be rude.
We didn't, like I said, we didn't go to this lighthouse, but we did hear the story on the tour. Supposedly in year 1873, one of the favorite activities of the children was to take a rolling cart that they would roll on a track up the hill to take materials to the lighthouse construction site. They would take this rolling cart, push it up the hill, pile in, and then ride down like a mini roller coaster.
So picture like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, like the mining cart that they use.
Yeah, they do that. I blocked out. I don't like that movie, so
Well,
I blocked it out to my memory, but I know what you're talking about.
You don't have to imagine it.
Okay, I won't imagine it.
But it's like one of those big carts.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Thank you. I will. So they'd pull on the handbrake before they reached the docks of the island, which is where they would unload the materials. It sounds fun. It sounds like something, honestly, my brothers would do. They were always kind of doing that kind of daredevil sort of stuff when they were younger. So I totally believe that children would do this. One day, however, there were 5 children into the cart to go down the hill. Apparently this was overloading it, essentially. It was 4 girls and 1 boy. So it could have been, I don't know, the son. But I think that Kevin said it was just like a neighborhood, like island children, people who live there. It's hazy on whether they caught too much speed because of the weight of the children in the cart, or that they tried to pull the handbrake too late, but the handbrake failed and or broke, and they all toppled in with the cart into the water. Like basically if you tip over a canoe and then you're kind of like trapped underneath it, that's essentially what supposedly happened to them. That was my understanding of it.
Except
anyway.
It's not a canoe, it's a big metal box.
Yes, sinking down fast. The boy supposedly made it out alive. He somehow was able to either swim away or was thrown from the cart before it reached the water. I couldn't really find anything. Both of those stories were told on different articles, so I'm not really sure definitively if he was in the water and swam away. I think that Kevin said he was in the water and pulled one of the girls to safety. Or that was one of the workers that jumped in. Workers did hear the screams of the children as they went into the water, came to the water's edge, dove in, and were able to save 1 child, which was a girl. They were not able to save the rest, unfortunately. When it was all said and done, supposedly 3 little girls died, which included 2 pity daughters and a third that was supposedly an African-American little girl of one of the workers on the island. One article I read said that the pity daughters were 15 and 13 when they died, and the other little girl was 10. Nobody else had the ages. That's just what I had on the article that I read. Supposedly after their deaths and after banning children from the work sites, workers heard the sound of children playing below them. They went to search, but none were found. They went to Hezekiah to report it and express the need to find the children because obviously they had this horrible accident. They don't want anything to happen again.
Right.
But he revealed that it was fine. They were like, we should go search. And he was like, nah. And they didn't understand why. And he was like, he revealed that the two of the girls were his daughters, and they had been there for weeks as spirits, and he had heard them already before playing. And so he told them to just leave them alone. Let his daughters play peacefully in the afterlife. Once the construction of St. Augustine's lighthouse was done, he could have gone back to Maine, but rumor goes that he stayed in his home near the lighthouse for the next 29 years to be close to his daughters. And then when he passed, he was then put to rest in Maine, but his daughters still remain at the lighthouse today.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think that, like, if he did really stay for the next 29 years to be close to his deceased daughters, and then to, like, be separated from them in the afterlife, that would be sad.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of experiences of these little girls at the lighthouse. Today, most of them consist of the girls being heard laughing at the top of the tower late at night. Others have spotted Eliza floating around the grounds in the same blue dress she died in, which is, ugh.
I don't like that.
I don't like it either. One story involves a relief lighthouse keeper living in the home in the 1950s, hearing footsteps upstairs of the lighthouse keeper home. He went to investigate, but no one's there. The head keeper at the time was James Pippin. He moved out of the lightkeeper's house to a much smaller home because the house was haunted and he would not stay another night in it. So he heard the girls in the home upstairs, supposedly. In 1955, the lighthouse lamp was fully automated, and the Coast Guard replaced lighthouse keepers with lamp lighters, which they just went by to make sure everything was operational, basically. He was staying the night at a rented home while he was doing that job, this lamp lighter, and he said he woke up one night to a small girl standing by his bed, and then he blinked his eyes, like, slowly, like you do when you think you see something, and then you're like, oh, I'm just gonna shut my eyes again for a second, and then
I don't do that.
Oh, you keep your eyes wide open?
No, I scream.
Oh, okay. You just stare them down until they disappear. He said he blinked his eyes like that, and then she disappeared. Kevin told us of his experience on the ghost tour. He used to run a little cart trolley for a ghost tour that would go, like, they would get out, they would walk through the property, and then he would come around and pick them up. He was waiting for the group to get halfway through before he drove around to pick them up. And there's a children's playground that is constructed on the lighthouse property. And supposedly, when he was waiting for the group, he looked over at the children's playground constructed on the property and saw one of the swings moving on its own. He said it was not a windy night, and the other swing beside it was completely still. It wasn't a subtle swing either. Like, this entity was pumping its legs and getting some air.
I was just about to say that.
It was going. At the time, he said he did not have a camera with a phone. It was a flip phone.
Right.
Which younger generations are not going to be able to know what that's like. But our phones used to not have cameras.
Definitely did not have front-facing cameras, so enjoy your selfies.
Right. And we used to have little cameras that we would take everywhere with us on little wristlets and take photos that way.
Yes.
But he didn't have, obviously, a phone camera. So he tried to race around to the meeting spot of the group in time for one of them to take a picture with their digital camera or record it on a video. But by the time that they got back to the swing, it had completely stopped. And it had been like a very short time, like mere minutes. So it wasn't enough time for the swing to just stop on its own.
Right.
Something had to stop it. He kind of pushed that off for a little while until he heard two other accounts from two other ghost tour goers who described the same thing. And these people were like years apart, he said. One, like, it was a multiple occurrence, but it wasn't like back to back. Like, it's something that happens all the time.
Right.
Which I thought was pretty compelling. But again, he never said if the other two had caught it on video or photos or not. I think that if he had video evidence, that would be somewhere online. Apparently, psychics contact staffers frequently at the lighthouse and recently told them that the African-American little girl who supposedly died with the Pitti sisters was named Eleanor or Ellie, and then a playful spirit of a girl enjoys playing hide and seek with people, especially people who are not in on the game, apparently. Surprise hide and seek. You're the seeker, even though you don't know it. Once a lone staff member was closing up for the night, he heard giggling at the top of the tower, thinking someone had left somebody had like abandoned, I guess, their child at the top of the tower. He like brushed up there, and it was empty. He began heading back down, and he heard the same giggles below him. So when he descended to the bottom, he found no one there again.
I would be giggling too if I just made a man climb up the lighthouse and then back down.
Well, I thought that was interesting because I saw a little synopsis of a Ghost Hunters episode from like season 1, so way back in the day of Ghost Hunters. And they did a episode on this, and they had what they call REM pods, which are basically pods with big antennas on them, and if energy goes through it, like it makes a sound, it makes a light, saying that there's a spirit there.
Yeah.
So they put one at the top, and then they put one at the middle, and then they put one at the bottom of the lighthouse stairs. And they were going up, and like it would go off at the top, and they would get there, and then the one in the middle would go off, and then they would get down there, and then the one at the bottom. So it would kept making them go up and down the stairs, and they were huffing and puffing, and I would
bet.
too.
No kidding.
I would be so frustrated with these little girls if they made me go up and down the stairs like that. There's some spirally steep stairs. But yeah, so those were some of the experiences that people have at the lighthouse. Apparently the girls can haunt the inside of the lighthouse, but mostly they're on the property.
Yeah.
You hear children playing, footsteps, the swings, that sort of thing. I did see some pictures of some orbs, very faint, and then ghost hunters had caught some EVPs, supposedly. I listened to them. I couldn't make anything out, and they didn't claim to have any specific words.
I see.
So yeah, that was the activity of the Pity Sisters and their hauntings of St. Augustine Tower.
So there's no like denying that happened, because it's pretty much a general agreement that this happened on this day. And you can see the death records, I guess. Like the Pity Sisters did die on the same day.
Okay.
In 1873. So like you said, Hezekiah Pity moved from Cape Elizabeth, Maine, with his family to oversee the construction. So he was like the big guy on campus for the new St. Augustine Lighthouse, because the previous one was built out of decomposing material and the sea was reclaiming it. And so they were like, well, instead of rebuilding what is already there, we're just going to build a brand new one.
I think that is so interesting, just because, also, if you go back in some of our episodes, I say interesting a lot, and I would really appreciate it if somebody made a drinking game out of it.
No, don't.
You would get really drunk.
We'll talk about another ghost story of how our listeners died.
But I do think it's fascinating that this lighthouse just like slowly fell into the ocean. I would want to be there to watch it finally just kind of...
Oh, its last light.
Yeah. Just go down.
There it goes.
Sinking.
Burr, burr, burr.
Also, could you imagine being like a scuba diver and like going down and kind of seeing it at the bottom?
Kevin did say that it's at the bottom of the sea now.
Yes.
So Mr. Pity was brought on board to oversee the building of the new lighthouse, and he lived on site with his wife Mary and their children, Mary, Eliza, Edward, and Carrie. And I mean, they played on the construction site. By 1873, just the foundation and 42 feet of the 165-foot tower were completed. And they were using the railway cart to move supplies up and down, like you said. So the children used the cart as essentially a roller coaster and would ride it down and then push it back up and ride it down. And it was said that only a wooden board at the end of the rail would stop the cart from tipping over into the water. It's unclear whether the wooden board was broken because they overloaded the cart, or the board wasn't there at all. Like I couldn't find any stories, news articles, anything on what actually happened to the children.
Really weird, because you would think that this big tragedy would be like front page news.
Yeah, and I mean, there might be newspaper clippings that aren't digitalized that I just can't see. Like maybe in the city archives they have them on hand. Even though we're here, we didn't make a trip to the archives because we didn't get going until like 9 o'clock last night.
Yeah,
so.
we traveled pretty late in the day, and then we had the ghost tour at 8, and it took a little while, so we didn't get to go there.
No, but the news articles might actually be somewhere, but I couldn't find any of them online. So on July 10th, 1873, the 3 Pitty sisters, Mary, who was 15, Eliza, who was 13, and Carrie, who was only 4, along with an unknown African-American girl who was about 10, got into the cart per usual. This one didn't have a boy included in the story, actually. And this is from the St. Augustine Lighthouse.org website. So there was no boy on there. The cart flipped into the water, flipping the girls into the water also. Mr. Dan Sessions, who was a young African-American worker, witnessed the event and then dove into the water. He reached the cart, lifted up the cart, and by that time 3 of the 4 girls had drowned, and the only survivor was the youngest daughter, Carrie, who again was only 4 years old. The construction site was shut down for a couple of days for the funeral of the girls, and then following the funeral, the Pitty family returned to Maine to lay their daughters to rest in their hometown.
So they actually took the daughters' bodies back. Okay.
According to the St. Augustine Lighthouse, the staff researchers haven't been able to find the final resting place of the young African-American girl, so it's still an unknown name. The odd thing that I found was a census record, and I wasn't able to see the actual record. This is just a reference to the record on rootsweb.com, and it lists Hezekiah Pitty being married to wife Mary in Maine, and he had 4 daughters instead of 3.
4 daughters, and instead of 3, and then also instead of 3 and a son.
He had a daughter named Hattie at the age of 14, and this is from an 1870s census.
Okay. So not far off at all.
Right. It lists his daughter Hattie at the age of 14, Mary at the age of 12, Eliza at the age of 10, and then Edward at the age of 7.
Edward?
And, yes.
Oh.
The son.
Okay.
And then Carrie at the age of 1.
Oh, so there was a son. So 4 daughters and a son. Okay.
Right. I was saying instead of 3 daughters, there was 4 and a son.
Oh, I thought it was 4 daughters instead of 3 daughters
3 and a son.
Okay.
No. So he had 5 children. That did not correlate with what I saw on findagrave.com, so I wasn't able to kind of cross-check this and verify, but I did think that it was very interesting that Hattie is not mentioned anywhere.
In the stories.
Or on Find a Grave. What happened to Hattie?
Yeah, what happened to her?
So...
They've got a mystery in the family, too.
I know. The only other discrepancy that I found was the line of Mr. Pitty sticking around for 29 years.
Right.
So his daughters died in 1873. Mr. Pitty didn't die until 1918. So it's 45 years.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't find anything that he stuck around in St. Augustine. He is buried in Maine, but so are his daughters. So I couldn't verify that fact anywhere. But just mathematically, if he did stick around, it was for 45 years.
And not 29.
Not 29.
Or it might have been that he stuck around for 29, and then once he was older, maybe Hattie or Edward or Carrie brought him back up to Maine to take care of him.
Right.
That could have been... There's so many possibilities.
There is.
And not a lot of facts to go with it.
No, I was expecting to, like, I was really excited to find those newspaper clippings or anything like that, because Kevin did mention that there's like newspaper articles and stuff, but unfortunately they're just not online, so I wasn't able to see them. So if you come across them, send them to me, because I want to see them.
We want to see them. We want to see them with our own eyeballs.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is interesting. There was a lot of experience stories, and then of course the Ghost Hunter episode that had the kind of evidence and then, you know, Kevin's own experiences. But I just wasn't able to find a lot of pictures. For so many people going to this lighthouse, there's not a lot of pictures.
No.
Why aren't people taking pictures? We took a lot of pictures, and I didn't get anything. Maybe that's why people are just not capturing.
There's nothing to share.
I guess. I don't know.
Well, it seems like there's a lot more audible evidence with these girls.
Yeah.
Than visual.
Yeah. So maybe they just don't have enough energy to kind of like be a full-on apparition.
Yeah.
Which is fair. You know what? Again, if I was a ghost, I don't know if I would be able to muster up. I'm very lazy in my life, so.
Yeah, no, I barely have enough energy just to make it through the day.
Exactly.
Hopefully it improves in the afterlife.
Maybe.
But yeah, that was...
Those are the children of St. Augustine, the ghosts. Some of them.
There are a lot of bodies here, and a lot of stories, and a lot of history. St. Augustine is like the oldest city in the U.S. It was a Spanish colony at first, so it's been here since the 1500s. It's got tons and tons and tons of history. So this is literally like the tippy top of the iceberg, not even the tip of the iceberg.
Right. And as we mentioned before on the ghost tour with Kevin, the last stop was a house that Spyglass tours was actually located, like headquartered in before COVID. And they used to actually have people go in and do a little bit more of an in-depth ghost investigation. And a lot of the stories there were very interesting and compelling. The reason why we're not doing them is because we are enticing you to go on this tour and hear them for yourself from Kevin. He has a lot of experiences, a lot of evidence, and a lot of detail. And I would just feel bad for spoiling it for people, and like you should take the tour yourself to experience it. And I think the house that Kevin, don't get mad at us, I didn't write it in my notes. I think the house is called the Carrera House. Mm-hmm. But definitely take the tour, because we said, we did a lot of mild ghost investigating while we were standing outside the house, and it was very cool. I enjoyed it.
It was good.
Yeah. So, out of all three stories, what are your general feelings and impressions?
I mean, I would say that James's story is completely validated. So I would say that one would be haunted. The gatekeeper's daughter, I think that the premise is there, because like I said, this is a very old city. Mm-hmm. So it could be something. Mm-hmm. It is not the gatekeeper's daughter, though. Yeah. So I think that's a misname at that point. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it would be a full-blown hoax, though. Yeah, I'm agreeing with you that the James is haunted. I believe that he does stick around that cemetery, and the gatekeeper's daughter is not a hoax. I believe that there is probably something there hanging around the gates. Do I think that it's a little girl? I don't know. I don't think so. It might be an older girl. It might be maybe one of the soldiers that used to stand guard. That could be totally a thing too. But I don't think that it's that specific story of Elizabeth. Yeah. And then with the St. Augustine Lighthouse, I do believe that it's haunted. Yeah, same.
I think that it is probably the Pity Sisters. Mm-hmm. At the very least. I know that Kevin told us 2 other stories about lighthouse keepers that supposedly haunt the place as well. But I do believe that 2 of the main driving forces of that haunting are the daughters. Yeah. So yeah, this was really fun. It was. Hopefully you enjoy this episode, because this was great. I loved seeing Jennifer. We had a great adventure. So yeah. So let's do sage moments, if we're all finished. My sage moment is just the fact that I got to take Cleo to the beach for the first time. I'm not doing a joke today. I'm sorry. That's I had one prepared, but I completely forgot it. So that's fine. I did make a really funny joke on the ghost tour, mm-hmm. because Kevin was completely voicing his opinion over a local tour group that just happens to do tours on trolleys. We're not calling anybody out, but no.
And I asked him if he was throwing them under the trolley at that point.
That was a funny one.
Thank you, Kevin, for laughing at my joke.
We were killing him. No, not literally, but you know.
So my actual sage moment, though, is bringing Cleo to the beach and letting her play in the water. We thought that she was like going to be scared of the ocean. She wasn't. It's like 50 degrees here, and she laid right down in the water, typical water dog. And I'll give you some pictures to post on the grams.
Yes.
It was cute.
Cleo is such a photogenic dog, and we're going to have to put them on Instagram because she looks right at home on the beach.
She loves it.
My sage moment, I guess, is not a joke or anything either, although I do have a joke real quick that Zach told me.
Oh, boy.
What is made of leather and sounds like a sneeze?
I don't know.
A shoe.
A shoe.
A shoe.
I love it.
But my actual sage moment also includes Zachary. Because of the pandemic, we weren't able to go on a honeymoon when we got married right away. And then the Thanksgiving week, we actually went on a honeymoon to Miami, and it was just so great. It was very relaxing. Great time together. We ate a lot of good food and drank a lot of good Cuban coffee. And so it was definitely what I needed to get into the groove of the busy holiday season.
Yes.
So
I'm glad that y'all had time to go do that.
Oh, it was great.
And you got to have your turkey dinner while you were down there.
Yeah, our hotel did like a 4-course meal, and I got a turkey dinner, and I didn't skip a beat on Thanksgiving.
That's awesome. So to wrap up, we took an awesome ghost tour, but we want to hear about your ghost tours as well. The good, the bad, the ugly. If people lit a leaf on fire above your head to make sure that none of the ghosts followed you home, or if you took a picture and saw a really scary shadow. We want to hear all about it and where you were. Any ghost tours that we need to go on. If there's any good stories you want us to cover next, send all of that to hauntedorhoaxpod@gmail.com. And then also don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Haunted or Hoax Pod, the tweeters, H or H Pod, and we are also on Facebook. Be sure to follow us on Facebook because we post about when episodes are up and going, and we also include any images that we talked about on the episode as well, so you're able to get that also. And then another thing that would help us out a ton is if you could rate, review, and follow us on Apple Podcast. That is a huge help. It helps get the word out. And yeah, we do love reading those awesome reviews. So just take a moment and hit those 5 stars if we deserve it. 4 stars are okay too.
Yes.
So what are we doing for the next episode?
Next time we are going up the East Coast back to New York State. It's a house, and we're very excited about it.
Yes. So I guess that's it.
That is it. We're going to go ahead and spend the rest of our day in St. Augustine having some fun, and we will hit you up next Tuesday.
Yeah, we'll see you next Tuesday.
See you, quote unquote.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.